where is your line between eustress, good stress, the stress that actually is enhancing, that makes you perform better, and where is your breaking point? Yeah, it's a really good question, and this is something that when we were working with the, elite military and elite sport, is that they very much wanted to work out before the event. So stress inoculation training is a big thing. That's what all the special forces do all the time. It's just like basically finding out where is your line between eustress, good stress, the stress that actually is enhancing, that makes you perform better, and where is your breaking point. And you don't really know it that point until you've actually tested it, and you can actually slightly push that line with training, with habituation. And so it really is very individually dependent. And so there's a lot of things that go into your stress coping repertoire. And so it can go from, okay, epigenetics, so the types of stresses that your great grandparents and your grandparents and your parents went through does pass through your genes. Then there's the type of stress that you were exposed to within your mother's womb. So how much cortisol you were exposed to will actually change how many cortisol receptors you have in your brain. And then, how much cortisol you'll express during stress. Then there is how much cortisol was in your mother's breast milk. Then there's modeling. So what type of stress, how your parents responded to stress and how you learnt how to respond to stress. Then there's, your life experience. Did you have a tough childhood? I find that kids that have had a bit of a tough childhood are much better at dealing with stress. You don't want your kids to be born into a feathered nest because they actually don't do well when they're adults and they have to deal with stress. So there's a really interesting study. They saw kids who were very badly abused, kids who had a little bit of adversity, and then kids who had a feathered nest. And they followed them throughout their lives. And interestingly, the kids who were very badly abused and the kids who had the feathered nest actually looked very similar in their adulthood when it came to their ability to deal with stress. So I always say to my kids, like, all this adversity that you've had to experience because I got divorced, it's good for you. You should thank me because it's actually made you tougher. So you need to have a stress inoculation throughout your life. You need to let your kids run, get cold, dirty, run with scissors, play with fire. So yeah, test yourself, test your limits before you get to that event if you're doing a big event. And then you have to have what we call interoceptive ability. So you need to really understand where your body is at, understand your stress triggers, understand that there's like a curve of optimal performance, underactivation, perfect activation, and overactivation. So you've got to know what are the signals when your body is actually getting too activated, too exhausted, too hot, too cold, too hungry, too sleep deprived. And then you've got to know where that position is. No one else can tell you that. And then you have to be very cognizant of where that line is. And then each time you train, you try and push that line a little bit further and habituate to that pain. So that's my ideas on stress.
Yeah, awesome. So we believe that there actually is good stress. There's that self-induced stress when you're doing hard challenges,
Yeah,
uh, and that's kind of different to sort of everyday stress,
yeah.
but like I guess similar. But is there good stress?
Yeah, so it's called eustress, and that is when you see that adversity or that challenge as something exciting and challenging. So you look at a situation, you think, I have the capacity, I have the resources, I have the identity. I'm the type of person who can deal with stress. So identity is really important. And then you have the motivation. And so, what we know is your perception of stress has a huge consequence on how your physiology reacts. So, if you see something as frightening versus something as challenging, it's called the threat versus challenge body of literature. If you see something as frightening, your cardiovascular system will change. You use more metabolic resources. You produce more cortisol. Your capillaries will constrict, and so you actually can't move as fast. Your blood profile looks different. So if you're frightened, Because in our evolutionary past, whenever we were frightened, it was probably because we were about to get, it, eaten by a beast or killed, had violence. So our blood will prepare for bleeding out. So what we see is constrictor in our extremities. We will produce more glycogen into our bloodstream, which is a food source, and our body will produce more platelets, which are clotting agents. So I call it sticky blood, and we produce more types of immune cells that are good for clotting and good for getting bitten by animals. So yeah, so there's this really unusual blood profile that you get when you're frightened. Now, if you see the same situation, like someone coming at you with a spear, and you think, I'm bigger than that guy, or I'm faster, or I'm tougher, you won't produce platelets, that interleukin, the cytokines. You'll produce testosterone, you'll produce cortisol as well, but your blood profile will be open and you'll be one of challenge and that you can overcome this adversity. So your perception of what's in front of you is incredibly important to how your body responds. So what we would do, we'd train athletes and we'd train the special forces when they saw something coming in and they start to feel nervous. We would say, that is not nerves, that is excited anticipation. And you get to choose. Right? They look physiologically the same. Stress and excited anticipation look the same, but you get to overlay your cognition on how you perceive that and therefore how your body would react. And when you're excited instead of stressed, you actually use less resources and you've got more in the tank to give to that situation. So it's just, yeah, you've got to train yourself.
It's remarkable that from a physiological perspective that the body reacts that way.
Yeah.
Like remarkable. You
I
think, oh
know.
man, you kind of think that it would, but when the data actually shows you, you're like, oh my god,
Yeah.
this is way more involved than anything else.
So what's dangerous about stress is the intensity, the duration, but your perception of it. So they did this really interesting study where they looked at 30,000 people over 8 years and they asked them two questions. They said, how much stress is in your life? And then how dangerous or how bad do you think that stress is for you? And so there were like groups where people said, yeah, I've got lots of stress in my life and I think it's really bad for me. Where there's people like, I've got lots of stress in my life, but I actually don't think it's that bad. I like it. And that in that Venn diagram where the stress is bad and I've got lots of stress, those people were much more likely to die in the 8 year period. So your thought about what stress does to your body and if it's good or bad for you actually changes like how long you live. So yeah, not only just in the moment, but more broadly over time, your perception of stress is very, very important.
Holy, okay.
Yeah, there's this awesome study where they looked at the mindset of stress, and they interviewed housekeepers who were like cleaning hotel rooms, right? And these were just like, sort of middle-aged women, not very fit, and they tested all of their vitals. And then they said to them, like, how much exercise do you do in your day? And they were like, oh no, we don't do any exercise, nothing. We just work too hard. We never exercise. And then half of the group, they said to them, well, actually, the amount of exercise that you do in your work day is more than the general surgeon would recommend for any person. So your job is actually very physically active and it's more exercise than most people do. And they were, really? And then the other half of the group, they told them something else. Then they followed these women over 3 weeks. And what they found was those that they told that their jobs were actually good for them and that it was a lot of exercise, their blood pressure dropped, they lost weight, they had different blood sugar profiles, they enjoyed their jobs more. And all it was just they were just told like a 2-minute speech that their jobs were actually good for them and the others had no change. And they were saying, are you guys sneaking off and going to the gym? And they're like, no, but it's just because they had a different perception of their job. And there's lots of research into this stuff. Your mindset around what you're eating, how much you're exercising can, statistically significantly change your outcome.